This is Session 11 on politics.
Well, to bring you an inside look at what's happening at the state capitol this legislative session, we have our On Politics panel here at KXAN. We'd like to welcome Karen Brooks, the digital executive producer for KXAN.com. She's covered the state capitol for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and the Dallas Morning News. Wayne Slater covers the capitol as senior political writer for the Dallas Morning News. And Elise Hu is a political reporter who focuses on multimedia projects for the Texas Tribune. And we've got a big one coming up. We talked about the speaker's race. How do you see it going tomorrow?
We sure do have a big one coming up. Well, the big caucus meeting happens tomorrow on the Capitol campus at 1:30 tomorrow afternoon. Largely, this will be behind closed doors, but the news we're going to be able to start seeing just as soon as that's over and as soon as we start talking to folks like Chairman Branch. It does not appear to me, just from my standpoint, that this is going to be anything that will be able to topple Speaker Strauss. I think it's significant that Beverly Woolley, who was a calendars chair under Speaker Craddock, who was Strauss's predecessor, came out very publicly around Christmas time and said, you know what, I'm with Strauss. This symbolically is a big deal because folks like Paxton, folks like Chisholm would have needed a perfect storm, and that perfect storm would have included somebody like Woolley, some more old Craddock guard type folks to go with them, and they didn't get her, and so they didn't get the rest of those folks either.
You know, and the interesting thing here is that the Republicans in the legislature, newly emboldened Republicans, want to maybe impose, as some people think, Washington-style politics. Let Republicans decide everything. That's the way they do things in Washington. That's not the way we've done things in Texas.
I also think that the Republicans that are doing this initiative, Chisholm and people who follow him, I don't know how strongly they actually expect to win. I think they do obviously want to win, and they're playing as if they are going to win. But I think they're actually, to use the word win again, in kind of a win-win situation here, because even if they don't win to get what they want and oust Strauss and get a more conservative speaker in, they have made their point. They have laid the groundwork for primaries next year. They've laid the groundwork for pushing for a new speaker in 2013. So I think no matter how this turns out, they've moved their agenda forward.
Well, and you know, on the flip side, people like Warren Chisholm don't really have anything to lose. These are folks who are already in the doghouse, who already lost their chairmanships, if you will. And so, you know, from his point of view, he can essentially shore up those conservative credentials without losing any sort of stature in the House that he didn't already, you know, lose back in 2009.
Wayne, we've got a huge chunk of change, $25 billion projected budget shortfall. Where do they ever begin to start whittling that down?
You know, there's a new poll out today. Newspapers have it across the state, and it basically concludes that everybody wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die. And essentially, Texans want the budget cut. They're part of the national move to have a more efficient government. But when you ask them specifically, how about public education? Oh, no. How about increasing the number of students per class? No. How about firing school teachers? No. How about reducing the amount of money to pay for the elderly or the disadvantaged? No, let's not do that. You know what? They're going to have to do that. The budget, basically, we face, as Dan Branch said, or as you said, $25 billion deficit. They're going to have to find the money somewhere, and the big money is education and health services.
I did think it was interesting in that poll that folks were more willing to cut higher education than they were willing to cut public education. And there's always been this push to sort of shore up higher education, get more Tier 1 universities in Texas, and yet folks in this poll, according to the newspapers anyway, seem to be more willing to cut colleges.
Yeah, which means that the college students aren't voting in the polls because they've been
yeah, their tuition has been
all over the country. You know, their tuition is already through the roof. And I mean, we saw demonstrations in San Antonio and other places by students of public universities that, you know, they're right in the middle of what they've worked for their whole lives, and so. Yeah, I don't know where they were when these polls were taken, but
there's a lot of buzz about raising new revenue, and casino gambling keeps coming up at every session. What about this year? You think it has any legs?
Well, I was going to say the poll shows that people like that idea. At least they prefer that idea over some other ideas. The two problems. One is we have a newly emboldened Republican majority. 2/3 of the House and Senate are Republicans. Many of them very conservative, don't like gambling. Secondly, the indications are it's probably not going to go anywhere. And even if it did pass, it wouldn't solve the budget problem for the budget that lawmakers will be writing this year.
Although at least a couple of weeks ago, there were only a handful of lobbyists didn't have gambling contracts. So at least a few weeks ago, up until, or maybe right after the election, and this is, I'm not exaggerating on this. You talk to any lobbyists and 90% of them have a gambling contract because all the gaming interests think that this is their year. You know, every year it's almost their year. But I think you're right. I think it's probably going to be a flash in the pan.
A lot of talk about immigration reform, an Arizona-style law for Texas. That is a highly divisive issue, and that could derail some bills in the legislature potentially.
Well, I have a totally different take on this in that, well, of course, I do believe that immigration is going to be one of the big issues, you know, besides the budget and besides redistricting. Those immigration bills, those Arizona-style pieces of legislation that we've already seen filed, we're going to see. But I don't think this is necessarily going to derail the session in any way because of the supermajorities in the House and the near supermajority in the Senate. What I do think will be interesting to watch is when these bills, if they ostensibly get passed, wind up on the desk of Governor Perry, because he hasn't been very clear on where he stands on specific pieces of legislation. When he's asked about immigration, he always pivots to border security. He has said that the Arizona-style bill wouldn't be right for Texas, but what if both chambers of the legislature were to pass it?
Yeah, and if they continue to pass conservative anti-immigration legislation, as many voters would like, that might include eliminating the in-state tuition that the children of illegal immigrants get. These are kids who've gone through the whole school system here in Texas. It is a law that Rick Perry once signed and has defended. Would he veto it now?
Interesting question. We're sitting here in downtown Austin, and we're being represented. The congressman is from San Antonio, Lamar Smith.
Right.
Redistricting, a big issue coming up. How do you see that one going?
Oh.
Karen, you can take it.
Well, you know, if history is any indication, everyone's going to have their great plan. They're going to pass something. They're not going to be able to agree on something between both houses. They're going to go into a special session. People might leave the state. Probably not how it's going to work. Maybe I'm just wishful thinking as a reporter. I think it's going to be big. I think it's going to be a big issue, but I don't think it's going to be... the difference between this session and 10 years ago when they redrew the lines is that the Democrats who had control of the House recognized at the time that the Republicans had won all the statewide offices and that they probably needed a majority in the House and in the Senate. They needed to be better represented on that front. And so while they didn't, and we're talking about state house redistricting at this point. So they drew a map and ultimately approved a map that ended up favoring Republicans and favoring the Democratic, speakership. Congressional, of course, that came 2 years later is what everybody fled. Right. I guess the supermajorities give me the idea that there's not going to be that kind of movement. But maybe you guys have something.
No, I think you're exactly right. One thing. Republicans were so successful at being elected to the state legislature, the state house, that you wonder if they're going to be able to redraw lines that meet the standards and can reelect every one of those 101 House members. And guys I talk to say no.
Yeah, Republicans are probably going to lose seats in the next cycle just because it's nearly impossible to draw safe seats for 101 of them. A couple points to think about as we head into redistricting. Texas will get 4 new congressional seats. One is likely to be in the Dallas County area, the other probably in South Texas. Right. So in suburban areas, we're likely to see new districts, and it'll be interesting to see. This is the first Texas redistricting that we've had in a long time, which the Obama a Democratic president's Justice Department will be overseeing. And so, if this does wind up at the Justice Department, and the Justice Department actually has to give pre-clearance on some of these maps too. So it'll be interesting to see whether that sort of tempers some things as well.
And they'll be watching that very closely.
You bet.
Thank you all for being here for our inaugural edition, and we hope to have you back as the session goes on. We appreciate everything. Well, here in Central Texas, one House race is boiling over.
Just whoever is the winner, just let it be.
Travis County voters say enough is enough. We take a look at what's in the week ahead as one local lawmaker is still fighting to keep her seat more than 2 months after the election. That and our wild bill of the week takes on Twitter. Next here on Session 11.
Good morning. Coming up, a shooting rampage in Arizona grips the nation and leaves Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords clinging to her life. We're going to get the very latest from the scene with a live report from NBC's Lester Holt. Then 5 of the representatives' colleagues in the House will join me to talk about her work here in Washington and whether the tone of our current political climate contributes to security threats against elected officials. Plus, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid in his first television interview of the new Congress. It's all coming up this morning on Meet the Press.